An agitated commander declared the Aspen enemy forces were nothing but a tease and suggested they should simply charge right at them. Another commander immediately questioned the suggestion, asking how they could be sure it was not a trap. A third person then asked whether they should just continue to take the constant attacks, while Marcus sat silently observing the bickering commanders. Marcus thought there were no useful opinions to be heard from the bickering, sighing that there wasn't much more he could do there. He reflected that while fighting in battle was his strong suit, he was not good at dealing with this kind of situation. A shifting sound accompanied the entrance of the ferry commander, who apologized for being late, prompting Marcus to ask what had taken her so long sternly. The ferry commander revealed that Encred, the leader of the Lunatics platoon, had asked for temporary operations control, while also proposing new tactics. Marcus asked whether Encred was the type of person who would come up with anything decent, to which the ferry commander replied that the specifics of the plan actually came from one of Encred's men, Crace. A commander asked what Encred's plan was, to which the ferry commander took a moment before beginning her explanation, revealing that the proposal involved. After hearing the plan, Marcus paused in consideration before deciding it was not bad. He then roared a command that they would go with the plan and ordered all men to prepare to march. Marcus continued, declaring that the Lunatics platoon would now go hawk hunting. As the platoon moved across the rocky terrain, a member of the Lunatics platoon remarked that he thought the mission sounded fun. A shifting sound was then heard as Rem, looking highly agitated, asked why they were not in pursuit and were instead traveling inside enemy lines. Christ replied that they were not following the Hawk's Claw, but were instead making him come after them. Encred explained that the Lunatics platoon would temporarily act as guerrilla forces. If they kept striking the enemy's rear echelon troops, the enemy would similarly send forces to get them. Rem questioned if that meant the Hawk would be there, to which Crace replied that he would, if everything worked out. Crace added that even if they did not manage to lure the Hawk, they would still inflict damage upon the enemy. Rem exclaimed that the plan was seriously convoluted, but Crace cut him off, stating that he knew Rem was simply stupid. But this complicated maneuver was for the best. Rem's eyes immediately widened, demanding to know what Crace had just said. As an incensed Rem glared, Encred stepped in. Rem, his face still conveying fury, ordered Crace to consider himself lucky and to watch his mouth. Encred asked how far away they were from their destination. A moment later, Pin happily exclaimed that she thought she could see it. Encred reflected that the key to the plan was high mobility, allowing them to strike and retreat quickly. For that to work, an experienced ranger who could find safe paths was a must. Encred continued thinking that he had asked command for reinforcements, and as a result, Pin had joined their platoon as a new squad leader. Encred asked Pin why she had to fully join their platoon, questioning if a temporary assignment would not have been enough, to which Pin simply replied that she had her own reasons. Encred looked up with confusion, prompting Pin to explain that she was now in an awkward spot because she had joined his squad, adding a sarcastic, "Thanks for that." Pin then stated that Encred could repay her in the future, instructing him to make the repayment good. Encred asked if Pin was still talking about the repayment, as Rem intervened, warning Encred to watch himself because he had a fiancée. Encred quickly denied the claim, stating that the woman was not his fiancée. A low sound of movement accompanied their arrival at the enemy camp, which was comprised of numerous tents and wooden structures spread across the open ground, and the platoon began the task of observing and stalking the area. Pin ordered the group to lower themselves, stating that she could see the enemy's base. Crace then added that they needed to escape if things went wrong, explaining that since he could not fight, they should leave him behind so a few others could go, and before Crace could finish his thought, Rem jumped in with a battle cry, screaming as he charged down the hill, threatening to kill anyone who got in his way. As Ragnar prepared to swing a weapon, he declared he would see how stable Encred's form was. Encred stared back, realizing the action was meant as a test. While they descended rapidly down the rocky terrain, a loud swish of air and debris followed their movement, and Encred thought to himself that even there, his training was continuing. The guards at the enemy camp looked on in confusion as Rem happily shouted as he approached and greeted them. One guard questioned who Rem was and asked his comrade if he knew the man. The second guard replied that he did not, then asked his comrade if he didn't know him either, beginning to question who Rem was. Rem immediately attacked, launching a projectile that struck the guard directly in the head with a sickening impact, causing blood to splatter everywhere and the guard to fall back. The remaining guards screamed as Encred and Ragnar landed and continued their swift movement down the hill. Powerful sound of movement followed Rem's kick, which had generated a cloud of debris that blinded the guard. Rem used this distraction, charging at swift speeds to put himself directly in front of the enemy guard. Encred watched the action, wondering what he was seeing, before realizing it was the quickest charge he had ever witnessed. He smiled, concluding that Rem still had skills he had not yet shown his protege. He really wants to learn this one. Other guards noticed the commotion and shouted in alarm, realizing the attackers were the Norelia enemy. They then raised the command to go and get the intruders. Encred shouted the command to fall back, declaring they were leaving before the enemy could regroup. As he retreated, Ragna expressed his disappointment, noting that he had not even pulled his sword out. As they fled the camp, Ragna rebuked Rem to read the room, stating that the opening attack was not his turn. Rem fired back, asking if Ragna wanted him to split his windpipe. Encred then firmly put an end to the squabble, reminding both men that they were still in combat, and there will be plenty of opportunities to fight in the future. As a pink-orange hue settled over the sky, the group attacked a second time, as they raced down a steep rocky incline towards the enemy position. One of the enemy guards, having anticipated the attack, quickly threw a knife, shouting in recognition that it was the same intruders again. Encred recalled the training he received, thinking to himself that he needed to use his dodging sense, look with his eyes, and then dodge. Encred swiftly avoided the thrown knife. Jackson commented that it had taken Encred 0.4 seconds to see and avoid the attack. Jackson continued his attack with a sharp motion, declaring that Encred needed to lower his reaction speed to at least 0.1 seconds to be able to say that he had fully grasped the dodging sense. After the guard took a blow to the neck that caused him to grunt in pain, Encred questioned Jackson in astonishment, asking if he was counting the time. A powerful booming sound erupted as Auden appeared, warning the men that training was good, but they needed to focus on the mission at hand. Auden then added, with a quick sound of urgency, that the enemy forces were coming. Encred immediately agreed and declared they were leaving. Later that night, the guards began a chase as the enemy pursued Encred and his allies through the forest. As Auden carried him, Crace reflected that he had initially wondered if these lunatics could carry out the mission, but now he realized there was no reason to worry about them at all. Encred declared they were heading further into the forest there. Rem followed, enthusiastically asking if they could just kill all the enemies. Encred simply replied no, and urged Rem to come along. Encred ordered Ragna to stay in formation, while Ragna, attempting to divert from the path, suggested the other way looked like a shortcut. Encred abruptly cut him off. Crace thought to himself that he didn't think Encred would be able to lead the men this well, wondering if this was really the lunatics platoon that he knew. After a while of running, Jackson stated that the enemy had stopped chasing and suggested they set up camp right there. Encred sat down, thinking that after realizing his platoon members followed his orders well from the today when he learned the heart of the superhuman, it had gotten a lot easier to control them. Encred continued reflecting that Rem's charge that morning was something else, noting that Rem had been listening to him well these days. Encred then wondered if Rem would teach him the skill if he simply ordered him to. Encred called out to Rem, who was lying down, and started to ask about the charge he had made earlier. Rem immediately sat up with a fierce expression, cutting Encred off by warning him to think again if he was really going to ask about that. Encred wondered why Rem was suddenly refusing, noting that he had never refused to teach him before. As Rem lay resting, he thought that while it was good for Encred to want to learn, the younger man had forgotten something. Encred realized what Rem meant, thinking that he had not even thought about the skill himself. Encred continued his internal monologue, realizing he had gotten too used to giving out commands, and that growth brought about by others was superficial. He concluded that he needed to go back to his roots. Rem mentally responded that Encred needed to think about the skill himself first, believing that learning would be more worthwhile if he did. As they began their run the next day, a sound of heavy breathing was heard, and a character identified as Andrew complained that they had been jogging non-stop since they started. He groaned that they were moving at such a high speed through the mountains that he felt he could collapse at any moment. Andrew continued thinking to himself that he knew the lunatics would be just fine, but he was surprised to realize that even Crace and the boss were holding up this well. Andrew gasped with exertion, thinking that Encred definitely wasn't this strong when he first met him, and wondered just how he had improved so much, thinking to himself that he, too, wanted to achieve more, clenching his fist in renewed determination with a sharp sound of resolve. Andrew's guard, Mac, thought of Andrew, recalling that ever since he was dedicated to Andrew as a friend of the young man's father, he always stayed by Andrew's side in place of his friend, who had passed away with the fall of House Gardner. Mac continued his internal monologue, reflecting that Andrew had always seemed like a child, but not anymore. Mac concluded his thoughts, stating that just by looking at Andrew from behind, he could already feel what was about to come, the rebuilding of House Gardner. Encred confronted Rem, stating that he had figured out how Rem performed his charge. Encred continued that it was the heart of the superhuman, explaining that Rem strengthened his leg muscles to move forward explosively. Rem responded to Encrid's realization with a pleased smile, confirming that Encrid was correct and had truly figured it out. He affirmed that the move was indeed his heart of the superhuman skill. He urged Encrid to try now that he had figured it out. Encrid replied that he would try the move by himself. Pin commanded everyone to stop and look, pointing out the enemy base was located between two cliff faces, a position where their escape route could be easily cut off. Encrid immediately noted that the visible base was a trap, explaining that such an obvious setup meant the enemy was hoping they would avoid it entirely. Krace confirmed this, stating the enemy's goal was to bait them into a different path, and then corner and kill them. Krace then warned that the Claw of the Hawk would be there soon. Encrid asked the group whether they should play the enemy's game. Ragna suggested it was too bothersome, and that they should just destroy all the enemies instead. Encrid smiled, stating he was leaning towards that idea as well. Encrid stated that if the obvious trap didn't work, the Hawk would be there even sooner. Since the base had a lot of armed personnel, Encrid declared that everyone should go in together. When Krace asked in surprise if he had to go in as well, Encrid quickly told Krace to stay behind. Encrid then commanded Pin, Andrew, and Mac to guard Krace. With a sharp booming sound and a shout of "Let's go!" Encrid and the others immediately jumped into the canyon, descending swiftly toward the enemy base below. The Greyhound's commander walked through his camp, thinking that this was the last opportunity given to his unit. He realized their mission was to help the Claw of the Hawk hunt down the Norelia guerrillas that were destroying their rear ranks. The Greyhound's commander thought it was humiliating that they, the famed elite troops of Aspen, had been forced to back up because of a single, albeit talented soldier. He gritted his teeth, deciding that despite the humiliation, they must clear the task to rise back up. One of the guards shouted in alarm that the attackers were here, identifying them as the Norelia guerrilla forces. The Greyhound's commander thought that the approaching enemies had walked into such an obvious trap, leading him to exclaim that they were idiots. The Greyhound's commander shouted in realization, recognizing Encrid, and declaring that he was part of the guerrilla forces. Encrid wondered in confusion if he knew the enemy commander. Rem questioned why Encrid was asking him, but then added that he didn't think he'd ever seen the commander's face before. Rem quickly changed his mind, stating that Encrid's memory really was terrible. The Greyhound's commander gritted his teeth, calling Encrid an insolent bastard. He then declared that it did not matter if Encrid didn't remember him, because he and his companions would all die there regardless. The Greyhound's commander charged toward Encrid, declaring that Encrid would be a stepping stone for the rise of the Greyhounds. Encrid blocked the commander's sword strike with his own blade in a flash of sparks and a sharp sound, holding the line despite the intense force of the attack. The Greyhound's commander shouted in surprise about the sword Encrid was holding. Encrid then spoke, identifying the commander as the one who guarded the flag during the Fog of Annihilation. Recognizing him as a Greyhound who knew Mitch, Encrid concluded that the commander must be him. The Greyhound's commander shouted that the recognition no longer mattered and commanded Encrid to die. The commander launched a fierce attack, but Encrid parried the strike with a sound of sharp metallic force. Encrid thought about the commander, remembering him as a strong opponent whom he could only run from previously. He questioned his own capability now, concluding that the commander should be a good opponent to test exactly how much he had grown. One of the guards, armed with a spiked mace, spoke with a low, threatening sound, noting that it seemed Encrid and the commander had some bad blood between them, but affirmed that the guards were still going to destroy all of them. The guards were completely ignored by Encrid's group, which caused one of the infuriated guards to scream about how they were ignoring them, before charging toward them with a booming sound of movement. Rem intercepted the charging guard's attack, bringing the enemy to a violent stop. Rem then calmly told the guard to be quiet, explaining that the group was watching something. As the Greyhound's commander charged in, Encrid sidestepped the attack and countered, slashing the commander with his sword with a sharp, forceful sound. Jackson thought to himself that Encrid had dodged in 0.1 seconds after seeing the commander ready himself, but Jackson concluded the reaction time was only barely passable. Infuriated, the Greyhound's commander shouted a curse as he charged toward Encrid with a powerful motion, but Encrid quickly intercepted the attack, blocking the commander's sword strike with his other sword. Ragna observed the fight, thinking that Encrid had unsheathed his second sword and blocked simultaneously. Ragna concluded that Encrid was slowly learning how to use both swords at once. The Greyhound's commander shouted in exertion as he powerfully slammed his sword down, intending to break Encrid's block. Auden smiled, thinking that Encrid did not have enough strength to parry the attack with just one hand. Auden then resolved to add another stone to Encrid's training regimen. Encrid swiftly backed away as the Greyhound's commander shouted in fury at his opponent for using two blades, like a pretentious bastard. Rem looked on with an intense grin, shouting, "That's it!" as he recognized the activation of Encred's heart of the superhuman skill. Encred's heart began beating soundly with a sharp, resonant sound as he fully activated the heart of the superhuman, enabling him to charge toward the commander at explosive speed. The Greyhound's commander shouted in shock as Encred's explosive strike connected, the force of the blow pushing the commander back with a massive booming impact. Encred's attack did not stop with the push. He immediately followed through, using his second sword to pierce the Greyhound's commander in the neck, causing blood to spray as the man fell back. As Encred stood over the defeated Greyhound's commander, who was gushing blood, a guard reacted with disbelief, shouting that there was no way their commander could have lost. Rem laughed loudly, declaring that was it, and that he knew the heart of the superhuman would suit Encred perfectly. Ragna added that the performance was not bad, while Auden smiled, expressing confidence that God was surely smiling down on their brother's progress. Rem yelled down at the enemy troops, shouting at them to get out there in front of him. Rem grinned fiercely, declaring that his axe wanted to celebrate by tasting some blood. The remaining guards charged forward with a sharp sound of determination, shouting for their comrades to show the pride of the Grey Dog and to fight to the last man. Auden intercepted the charging guard's attack, bringing the enemy to a violent stop. Auden then shouted that he would answer the enemy's courage by sending him to the Lord's side. After Auden struck the enemy guard, causing him to grunt in pain and be knocked back with a jarring sound, Andrew watched and questioned in astonishment how Auden had blocked the attack barehanded without even getting a scratch, wondering what kind of muscles Auden had. Pin smiled playfully and asked with a curious sound whether Auden actually looked kind of useful too. Rem charged forward with a fierce expression, bringing his axe down onto an enemy guard's weapon in a sharp, clanging strike. After Rem struck the enemy's weapon, Ragna immediately followed with his own attack, striking the same enemy guard and sending him flying back with a grunt of pain. Rem yelled in disbelief, cursing Ragna as a mad, lazy bastard, and demanded to know if Ragna had been planning to slice him up too. After Rem accused him of attempted friendly fire, a guard shouted a command to die as he drove his sword down at Ragna, who remarked that it was a shame Rem had dodged the strike. Ragna then effortlessly dispatched an incoming enemy guard who charged at him, cleanly cutting the guard down with a swift motion. M cursed Ragna as a cocky bastard before Rem swiftly and powerfully attacked another guard. Ragna looked down on Rem and asking if Rem was scared now. Rem shouted at Auden, calling him a lump and telling him to inform his god that Rem would be sending him a friend. Auden smiled playfully, replying that the Lord says he doesn't need friends like that. Krace then shouted, asking if the two were seriously going to fight right then. The remaining guards seized the opportunity created by the infighting, shouting the command to encircle them while they were split from within. Amidst the enemy charge, a sharp, swift sound of movement was heard as Jackson appeared, eliminating all the charging guards instantly with a burst of thrown knives, leaving them bleeding and collapsed on the ground. Encred told Jackson that there was no need to kill them all, noting that most of them were already wrecked anyway. Before Encred could finish his thought, Jackson saw something coming from the forest and immediately reacted. As an arrow came flying in, Jackson moved swiftly, managing to block the incoming arrow with a sharp, explosive sound of impact. Encred asked if they were here, and Jackson confirmed that they were, identifying the attacking force as the Hawk's Talon. Rem leaned forward, asking Encred if he knew the difference between a sniper and a hunter, enthusiastically stating that hunters were way more fun than snipers, especially axe hunting, calling it awesome. Encred looked on, questioning what Rem was trying to say. Rem stated that if one received a gift, one should give one back. With a swift, powerful motion, Rem then charged into the forest, leaving Pin behind to shout for him to wait. Pin looked on in concern, asking if Rem could act alone like that. Krace replied that Rem was not someone who would die off somewhere, telling Pin to leave him be. Andrew told Encred that they should get out of there for now. He explained that the enemy main force might pursue them from over there, and if they stayed put, they would become the Hawk's targets. Encred agreed with the necessity of leaving, declaring that they would use the best way to blind the enemy and get out. The enemy camp erupted in a massive fire, burning the structure down, as Encred noted that this destruction seemed to have become a habit. As fire raged in the background, a cloaked figure sighed, noting the smoke. A nearby archer lamented that the enemy had slipped out of sight, then asked the Hawk's Talon what he intended to do next. The hooded Hawk's Talon replied to his subordinate, giving the simple command to pursue the enemy. As the group scaled the sheer rock face with sounds of climbing effort, Encred thought that Rem acting alone wasn't planned, but acknowledged it was not a bad tactic. Encred continued to think about the situation, noting that Rem was targeting the Hawk's Talon, who was in turn targeting the rest of them. Encred realized they could now act as bait to deliberately draw the Hawk's attention. He also thought that since they had chosen rough terrain on purpose, there was only a slim chance the hawk could see them. Ancred continued to think, noting that since they had picked terrain that was hard to shoot in, the spot was comfortable. He concluded by giving Rem permission to hunt as he liked. While hunting in the forest, Rem looked up and thought that the memory brought back old times. He recalled that back then, he was the exceptional hunter the tribe had held high hopes for. Rem continued to reflect, noting that he couldn't return to that time now that he had left, but he could summon the memories for a moment, specifically from the moment they first met. While in pursuit, one of the hawk's Talon men noted that the targets escaped well at awkward angles, but stated it was just stalling and that the Talon would not lose his target. Suddenly, the man was decapitated, causing his head to fly off with a stream of blood as the hawk's Talon remained as still as he was before. Another enemy soldier screamed, "Ambush!" and commanded the remaining men to scatter. The enemy forces dispersed as Rem continued his aggressive charge into the group. Rem continued his chase, cutting one of the scattering enemy soldiers down with a booming, forceful strike, while the dying man cried out in pain. He continues his deadly pursuit, taking out one guard after another, until none are left. The hawk's Talon ran in panic, thinking about Rem, calling him that barbarian and wondering what was happening. The Talon was astonished that there had been absolutely no sign of the barbarian and wondered when he had suddenly appeared. Rem continued his fierce charge, as the hawk's Talon gritted his teeth and launched an arrow with a powerful echoing sound, declaring that hunting was always on his side. Rem smashed through the incoming arrow with his axe. He followed through with the strike, slamming the backside of his axe directly into the hawk's Talon's shoulder. The hawk's Talon cried out in pain as he was struck, but Rem stood over him, shouting for the hawk brat to stop whining and use more strength. Rem declared that this was a rare hunt and commanded the Talon not to end it so boringly. Rem finished the hawk's Talon with a swift, powerful strike using the Talon's own arrow, slicing the enemy across the throat. Rem then looked down at the defeated foe, stating that the fight was lame to the end, stating that he had wanted the man to suffer more while they were at it. Rem added that the fight was also an opportunity to brush up on his rusty hunting skills. Rem paused in thought, realizing with a surprised expression that he had just acted exactly like the lieutenant. He concluded that after being around Ancred so long, he must have learned the behavior without even realizing it. Rem continued his thoughts, reflecting that the lieutenant accepts he lacks talent and thinks about how to move on to the next step. Rem realized that if he also adopted that accepting, reconciled attitude and made it his own, then Rem concluded his reflection, stating that he didn't know how meaningful this choice would be, and that maybe nothing would change. He decided he should just give it a try, like the lieutenant he had seen. Thank you for watching. See you next time.